that he could go online and get. And it was a little bit disturbing to me to think that it was so easy for him to do it, and to that his shame had not driven him to stop the behavior. The person who he had taken the information from, that's what stopped the behavior, not him. We're seeing it with sports betting, turn on a football game, NCAA game, and they're talking about the online bullying and the threats that are made against athletes now because, they missed the shot, lost the game, and people had bets on it. So we're seeing more and more of it. Gone are the days of making a big trip to Las Vegas. I think more of it's being done in home or at work, on the computer or on your tablet or on your phone. And I think it's going to continue to. Yeah. Sorry, I got sidetracked by a comment.
If you would like, we can take a second for just a couple questions
Sure.
that come through in the Q&A. Um, if I can pull it back up. It disappeared off my screen, sorry. There we go. The first one we had is from Jacqueline. How have you managed billing with insurances when treating clients with process addictions other than gambling addiction due to needing a diagnosis?
I treat, so I'm going to talk about with ART, but treating the anxiety that comes with it, you can
Mhm.
code it there. I don't take insurance in my practice,
Yeah.
but people I know that do either they'll code sex addictions under F59.2, I believe. And then with the gambling, that meets criteria in the DSM, but not all insurance covers process addictions. And shoot, some of them don't want to, cover substance use disorders. But if you're treating the anxiety or the depression or the OCD behaviors, those are usually easier workarounds. So it was interesting when I worked in treatment centers, I get more days if I said somebody had PTSD than if they had a heroin addiction, because we need to treat the traumatic stress disorder, and they'll give them days for that, but or anxiety disorder.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And then we can do another, just to touch back on the pornography. What tips do you have for a man who is using increasing pornography but stopped use to save his marriage and family? How can he maintain his sobriety and have healthy long-term recovery? I'm sure you'll touch on this with the ART and everything, the art.
Right, and we're going to
But
get to some of the
yeah,
treatment methods that are being used now.
fabulous. Okay. And
Uh,
then we can hold off on the next few.
okay. Do you have another one, or do you want me to continue?
There's a couple, but if you want to move through there and we'll kind of take another pause.
Okay. We'll take a pause at the assessment tool. So 3 slides
Sounds
or
good.
4 more slides on the 4th slide. Um, so like I said, 70 to 90% of men have a lifetime exposure to pornography. And that means the kid that found the Playboy magazine right in his parents' bedroom or something. So he's seen it, but he never developed a pattern of use. Women, it's 40 to 70%, and it becomes problematic at 3 to 8% prevalence. And of course, men are going to be higher numbers than that. And I will show you that number here. So this is a self-reported study, and if you look at the date, it's 7 years old, right? So this is, if we had one for 2026, I can almost guarantee you the number of users has gone up, right? But men are 3 times as likely to identify that they're addicted to pornography. So they're at 3% of the total number, right? But it's interesting that 2% are addicted, and I always say it's like in substance use disorders. You tell me you had 2 drinks a night, and I just double it, because if you're coming into treatment, you're drinking more than 2 drinks a night, unless your 2 drinks are 32 ounce, glass of wine. But typically we're under-reporting as far as addictions. But if you think about 2% of our population, that's a pretty big number. And that number with the pornography, it probably includes alcohol use disorders, cocaine use disorder, and methamphetamine use disorder as well, typically. So it's usually not just pornography. Screen and internet addiction. Um, I did not put this on the slide, so I'm going to just tell everybody the guy's name because I think it's brilliant. And I have an article that it was from a blog he did. The guy's name is Jonathan Haidt, and it's spelled Haidts. Maybe you could can we put that in the chat room or in the Carly? And the book is Anxious Generation. These numbers are not from his book, but the estimated prevalence, and this is 2 years ago, this study that you're looking at, general population, so all people with cell phones or tablets or internet, 6 to 12%, adolescents, 10 to 30% are going to meet criteria for some sort of addiction to the screens or the internet. The risk of it, the depression, the anxiety, academic decline. There's schools in Europe that are now getting rid of tablets and going back to the books because they're finding that the electronic instruments are just in the way of learning and brain processing, especially in developmental stages of life. This is going to become an increasing problem. Even if we have self-driving cars, it's still going to be an issue with teens. Teens are bad enough drivers, right? That's why they have higher insurance rates. I did when I was a teen. I got in 2 accidents. And hand a kid a cell phone and a steering wheel, I don't know if that's a good idea, but I also understand that fewer kids are demanding their driver's license now when they're 16. They're waiting until their later years. So, Haight's book talks about that in 2010 to 2012, we saw an increase in anxiety and depression, like a twofold increase, went from 50 to 100%, depending on the study that you're looking at. And kids reporting with anxiety and depression. And so the question was, what changed? Because we talked about it during COVID, the kids were more depressed and anxious, and we said it was because they'd been taken out of school from their social networks. They were locked down. They didn't have access to recreational activities, all these excuses. But he argues that the problem started before COVID-19, like 4 to 5 years before COVID-19, because there was all of a sudden smartphones, no longer flip phones, no longer just an internet, but now you had the internet on your phone accessible. You could go to your social media on your phone. And so in statistics, we talk about correlations, not causes, right? But the correlation is pretty glaring that when smartphones came out and kids had more access to the internet on their phone and more access to their social networks, the increase in anxiety and depression went up. And not just in America, but in every developed country in Europe as well. So when we see those kind of correlations, it's pretty apparent, what's driving the emotional disturbance. And for assessment tools with substances, most people are familiar with these. They're pretty standard, especially the audit. And for gambling, the PGSI is kind of the one that people are going to go to. Behavioral addictions are a little bit harder because there's not a lot of assessment tools around them. Because am I going to develop an assessment tool for something that isn't really recognized by DSM or go-to, right? But again, it doesn't mean that we don't have issues. So this becomes more of an intake process and question as opposed to screening when we're talking about things like pornography use and screen use. You like the fact that I have my phone right here? I like it when people forget their phone at home and it's like, I gotta go back and get my phone. I'm like, why? I love it when I forget my phone and don't even realize I don't have it for a few hours. It means I'm not getting too bad yet. Okay, so let's take those questions and I'll talk about
Yeah.
treatment.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started with those again. So this question comes from Sarah. If addiction is often identified by its negative impact on functioning, relationships, and responsibilities, how do you motivate someone to pursue sobriety when they're seeking help for mental health concerns but do not believe their substance use is significantly impairing their life or contributing to their symptoms?
Right, and that touches on the secondary gain, right? So the secondary gain is one, I get more attention from my loved ones, but also my depression might be less if I'm drinking. And so if the depression isn't getting worse with my drinking, am I allowed to continue my drinking? And motivation, when we talk about art here, we have to have three things with ART. Motivation is one of them, ability to hold a thought and able to move your eyes back and forth. But if there's not a motivation, that's hard. And it's hard in early recovery for people to stay motivated if things around them haven't changed and they don't see the need to change themselves. So if I give up my screen time, or I didn't mention it, we're not going to get rid of phones, right? We're not going to get rid of the internet. So like an eating disorder, we have to learn how to balance it and how much is enough and limit our own time and set boundaries. But if I set a boundary around it and nobody else does, am I going to sustain that boundary?
Mm.
If I make a commitment to only use my cell phone and screen time 1 hour a day, and my family's still on the phone at dinner time, how long am I going to sit there and watch them before I pick up again? So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's all about finding their motivation. And the motivation may be about somebody else in the beginning, but for sustained recovery, it has to be an internal dialogue, not the external intervention.
Great, appreciate that. So kind of touching with the phone aspect too, as modern society allows people to meet many of their needs independently and maintain fewer social relationships than previous generations, how do we distinguish between genuine addiction-related impairment and changing patterns of human connection and lifestyle?
So the subjective component of addiction. Objectively, we can all agree that if you are shooting heroin and not waking up and sleeping in the back alleys, and there's a problem objectively, right? Subjectively, for that same heroin addict, he's like, it's not that bad. I always think of the Black Knight in Monty Python, and he's fighting with the king, and the king cuts his arm off. He's like, it's just a flesh wound. He cuts his other arm off. I can still take you. He's like, no, you can't. You have no arms. He like it starts kicking him and cuts his legs off. He's like, there, now let me pass. No, I'll get back here. That to me is addiction. It's like one thing after another. Objectively, you're done, right? Subjectively, the addict brain says, no, I'm not done. And as the society changes, right, we're gonna have to decide how much we change with it. So what one person may say is impairment objectively, right, may not be impairment to me subjectively, and vice versa. So we have to answer our own truth, if you will. No matter what society does, there's a lot of things in society that I don't agree with, right? It doesn't mean that I have to fight with them. It just means I have to stay in my lane. I get in arguments all the time about legalization of marijuana. It's just marijuana. I'm like, it's not marijuana anymore. It's straight up, 80% THC. And you're driving smoking that pen. And I wouldn't suggest somebody drive around slamming beers.
Yeah, awesome. So then we have a couple more. Is there an association with gaming as a child and gambling as an adult?
There's some correlations to impulsiveness, and that's my concern with the cell phone use in early development. You see kids at 2 and 3, and the brain is designed to develop and move and interpret the world, not to have the world always handed to it. This is your perception. This is the world in which you live. We are creative by nature, and I think sometimes we interfere with the creative nature of people in developmental periods with introducing pre-formatted stimulus, if you will.
Okay.
So there's certainly the correlation between function, brain development function, and I'm sure we're going to see more brain scans of kids like we did when, the ACEs study was being done and we started taking imaging of a child whose brain was developed during very traumatic childhood, and the actual organ of the brain is diminished in size as opposed to a brain that was developed in a healthy, loving home. And so my suspicion is, as we continue to study more about the effects of technology on development, we'll start seeing some brain images and understand that, yeah, we're affecting the child's brain development.
Yeah, that information's a bit of a work in progress, huh?
Right.
Um, Perfect. So there's a couple more. What are the results of harm reduction as opposed to abstinence?
As far as process addiction, we're looking at harm reduction more than we're looking at abstinence because we're not going to get rid of the phones. We're going to be exposed to naked or half naked bodies. We're going to be exposed to sex. We're human beings. We're sexual in nature. So with process, except gambling, we don't need to gamble, but we are risk takers as human beings, right? So I may not go to the casino if I'm a gambling addict, but I'm still going to take a risk, right? I'm going to try to take a shortcut going home if traffic's backed up. That's a risk. I'm going to buy stocks on the stock market or give my money to an investor. Is still a risk, right? And is there a reward in that? So when it becomes a problem, it becomes a problem.
Mm. And then we'll do one more and then we can keep
Sure.
moving. Wonder why exactly the use of the word process is used for process addictions. Good question.
Or behavioral addictions. It's semantics to me. It's process or behavior. There's no answer to why.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So currently, substance use disorders, we use a lot of different treatment methods, a lot of different treatment planning. We became trauma informed for a while, which is all nice and sounds good, but I don't understand trauma informed as opposed to trauma focused because when I treat addiction, I'm trauma focused. I'm looking for the underlying issue. It's not enough to say I'm informed. We all know there's trauma that's informed, but are we focused? Are we focused on the underlying issue, what's driving the addiction? What's encouraging the repeat behavior? Same thing with behavioral addiction. See, I changed it on this slide. It's not process anymore. It's going to be behavioral. But CBT, ACT, mindfulness, getting present, recognizing that if I have an urge or craving, I don't have to act on it. And so kind of disciplining ourselves. And that may be, months into our abstinence period until we start to develop a harm reduction model, as the last question was, can I invest my money in a risky business or do I have to avoid all risk? This is a slide from what I did back in um, October, November last year, but accelerated resolution therapy, which is what I want to talk about for behaviors or process addictions, is evidence-based. It's still emerging. We're still doing new research on it. Some new research is being done on brain imaging to look at the actual effects on the brain and the active areas of the brain. The protocol is established, meaning I don't have to figure out how to do talk therapy. It's a set protocol. You follow a script. It addresses multiple facets of addiction, and I'm going to get more into what those facets are here in just a second. We can treat the underlying issues. So if I'm gambling because I'm anxious or I'm watching pornography because I'm depressed, which creates more depression in my experience. Um, we need to address the depression and the anxiety, not just the benefits of using a process or a behavior. And it uses multiple treatment methods. So within ART, we are using narrative therapy, we're using gestalts, we're using some CBT, we're using some mindfulness, and we're based in the eye movement therapies of EMDR. So we're still using eye movements to move a lot of the sensations that occur. And we're acting on the dopamine centers. The biggest difference is, and again, this was from last fall, but I just want to cover for people that weren't there. With ART, typically it's 1 to 5 sessions. If I'm working with an addiction, I'm usually doing 3 to 5. If I'm working on a trauma, it's usually just one. If I'm working on anxiety and depression, it might be multiple sessions of ART, which is still less than prolonged exposure therapies, CPT or CBT, and EMDR. The other primary difference is we're replacing images, and I'm going to get into that when I talk about the Gestalt here in just a second. It's a silent therapy, so we don't have to talk about it. So I've worked with people with sex addictions and pornography addictions. I don't need to know what they did or what was done to them, and they usually don't want to disclose some of that stuff. But the cool thing is I don't have to listen to it, and they don't have to say it because we're working on images and sensations more than the narrative and the talk. I'm going to talk to you a little more about the metaphors. It's different from EMDR. If you're EMDR trained, we use a random, I am EMDR trained, but we use a random set of eye movements. With the ART, it's a prescribed set. So there's a certain number that we use, and it's structured. So the method is very structured, and for me personally, I think it's effective in the fact that I don't have to figure out what I'm going to say next or what I'm looking for or what the question should be. The protocol is really laying it out for me so I can stay focused with my client and work on the reasons to change the addiction or change the behavior. Positization is a term that Lainey Rosenzweig came up with. She's the one that kind of put all the protocols together and invented it, if you will. We're using eye movements. Like I said, we're changing the narrative. So if I'm working with a process or behavioral addiction, and they started when they were 10, looking at stuff on the internet with their cousin, and then it became a problem when they were in high school and they got busted, and they're continuing to use the pornography in their 30s, right? And now their wife has found out and she's threatening divorce. We need to go back and change that narrative that he's whatever it started out as, right? Even if the narrative is this is how to feel better, this is how to have relationships, whatever that belief system is around the narrative, we need to change it. We get rid of the cravings by replacing them with positive images, and we change their beliefs naturally. So I don't suggest to people like with hypnotherapy, we're letting them drive the narrative, the new narrative, and the new images. So metaphors are used by everyone every day. I don't know anybody that doesn't use a metaphor. Within the world of addictions, we often hear people say, stoned. What's that mean? If you really break it down, but the metaphor of just being laid out, knocked out, like in biblical times when they would stone somebody for, adultery, on a heater, and I think that's how you say it, when you're gambling, right? So you're on a hot streak. That's just a metaphor for I'm winning, right? High as a kite, never been that high on a string, but I can relate to the sensation that I'm above the earth, right? So we use the metaphorical language within the ART session to move the sensations and I'm talking physical and emotional sensations and the mental obsession. So metaphorical tools show up a lot within in the work of ART so that we can help the person decrease the need to get high as a kite. We use a lot of gestalts. So I will have people go back and talk to their younger self, either at the onset or when it became a problem. And what would they go back? So if they're motivated, remember they have to have motivation. If they're motivated to change and they want to stop using, go back and talk to that 10-year-old who first went on the internet and started looking at pornography. And what would you tell that 10-year-old? The same gestalt we do with an empty chair, right? But when we throw eye movements in, it's just far more effective. And when we also move the sensations that the kid's having. So if I go back to that event, what was the kid trying to get in that moment? Was he just curious? Was he afraid? Was he being embarrassed by his friend who said, you need to look at this, or you're a wimp, you're a wuss, look at it? What would you do if you could go back and talk to yourself? Same thing I do with substance use disorders. That person that first took that drink, right, out of peer pressure, what would you tell them today now that you've got 5 DUIs, have had 3 marriages, and you're broke? Speaking to, so internal family systems, I speak to parts and speak to the enabler parts as well as the external enablers using the eye movement therapy. And one of the, if you remember back to the cycles of addiction, oops, sorry. If you remember this, the parts of the cycle of addiction, guilt and shame show up in the cycle in just about every model you look at if you go online and start researching them. If I don't get rid of the shame, then I risk the person relapsing. And I've seen it happen time and time again. They don't do the work around their shame. Um, and it's like this burden of embarrassment and hurt you take with you, and you can only carry it for so long before you're going to have to do something or use something to get rid of that feeling. So a lot of the ART that I do today centers around forgiveness and seeing my own self and forgiving myself. Because guilt tells me what I've done is against my nature. Shame says that it's who I am, but it's not who we are. So I use the eye movements in the protocol within the ART um, therapy to go back and find that earliest moment. And usually, the majority of the time I've done this with people, it is some precipitating event, just like with substance use disorders, where they were caught in a situation and they were uncomfortable, and this made them feel better, right? Masturbating with a friend, watching pornography, and he feels or she feels physically better for that moment. And so the brain says, hey, this is how you feel better, especially for a young developing brain. And that release of dopamine, the neurotransmitters that are firing, all of a sudden, this is how I'm going to feel better. And they do it again, and it feels good physiologically, right? And it becomes a pattern. The pattern becomes the behavior, and the behavior becomes the addiction. So going back and addressing that with the earliest self so that that self understands, I don't have to do this to feel better. There are options, and talking to myself about the options. Um, and changing the narrative. So I'm not bad, right? The forgiveness piece, it's just what I did is not who I am. Changes the narrative, changes the belief. Okay, I got a couple of case examples and then I'll open it up for questions if that's okay, Carly. Good. So a 25-year-old male came to me for a gambling addiction. And this one moved rather fast. That's why I guess I remember it more than the others because we did a couple of sessions around the gambling issue because he was going out every night. He wasn't going to school. He had dropped out of school. As a matter of fact, it had become a problem. He wasn't showing up to family functions. And his parents were concerned, and he was now concerned as well. So when he came to me, um, we did a couple of sessions of ART around the gambling. But as we did that, then we had to address the underlying issue because the gambling took away a lot of his anxiety. He had a lot of social anxiety, didn't feel like he fit in. So we did the work on the social anxiety piece last. So that was another 2 sessions. But the last time I talked to him, he hadn't gambled on anything for 3 years. He had finished school and he had found a job outside of Arizona. And as a matter of fact, his psychologist had called to get trained in ART because the shift was pretty dramatic from obsessive thinking about gambling when he wasn't gambling to no thoughts about it at all. A 60-year-old porn addict who was watching pornography daily, interfering with his relationship with his wife, causing sexual dysfunction within the marriage. In 3 sessions and going back, he was one that had done it, watched pornography early in his life, um, with a family member who molested him. But the physiological component, right? It felt good. And this happens a lot with molestation cases. There's this confusion because it felt good, but I know it's wrong. And so the disruption between the brain and the body, right? But it feels good. I shouldn't be doing this. And the only way to get rid of that was to increase his pornography use to get rid of the shame and the guilt from what had happened. And he'd been doing it for decades. And so going back and kind of healing that part, right, and healing that child and forgiving that child was what was key for him. And currently I have a nicotine addict who was using, but he didn't understand what he was using. The nicotine was for his anger, and it helped calm his anger down. So we had to address the anger issue once we started getting the nicotine cravings down. So I'm always looking for the underlying issues, whether it was a childhood event, emotional disturbance, mood disorder. There's usually something that's co-occurring when we're dealing with addictions. That's it.
All right. We can open it up for questions, but just really quick, I wanted to make sure everybody remembers you'll receive the CEU certificate to the email that you registered and attended with in your email by the end of next week. But we'll go ahead and move to those questions. So we've got one. I'm a therapeutic mom. I have been getting this last year, 15 and up on marijuana, doing the CFT. I'm not able to get the kid help due to it's only marijuana. So if there's any resources you have to share, we are also open here if anyone wants to reach out to us for any resources as well. I just want to mention that. But
So he's resistant to treatment?
that's what I'm gathering. I
Okay.
don't know if you want to
Okay.
add some more
Yeah.
context.
So, I mean, treatment's no good if there's no motivation. So looking at the risk and the harm, I'm, I'm with her. I'm so tired of people telling me it's only marijuana, because they haven't dealt with the psychotic break that I have people experiencing because of just marijuana, especially for 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. Their brains are still developing. And I mean, I could dump research on a kid all day long, but until they read the research and understand that during this period of life, and the impulse control that's supposed to be developing in the teen years, that's not being developed because it's being interfered with. I don't care if it's marijuana, alcohol, kratom. I didn't even mention kratom, which is another issue that's coming up. Any of those substances affect the brain development. So the kid has to decide, what do I want from life? Do I want to feel better for a moment, or do I want a healthy, functioning brain in the long term? And resources, I mean, there's not a lot of resources. I know there are some teen centers that treat addiction. I know there's a couple here in Phoenix, but the kid has to want to get into treatment. So, um, but Alateen might be an option.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, I that is one I'm familiar with. So We finished that question. The next one, we have there are people who have been on medication assisted treatment for many years. Some people see it as substituting one substance for another. How do you see it?
Depends on which one we're talking about. So methadone, I would never condone methadone because I've watched too many people come off methadone and the horrific withdrawals that they experience. I know Suboxone and Subutex, people argue about whether or not they're switching addictions and, the harm reduction model. Again, you have to speak to the individual about their motivation. Me personally, I want to be off all substances, and I am. But if somebody's in chronic pain, how do we manage that? Do we do it with Suboxone or even gabapentin becomes addictive, right? And it's a medication that's prescribed in just about every treatment detox that I know of, and they give out the benzos, but they don't talk about, what you're going to experience as a side effect while you're in treatment from the benzos that you got in detox. So there needs to be more transparency as far as I'm concerned with the pharmaceutical companies. That's my opinion.
Okay,
Because they don't
gotcha.
talk about the addictive nature of some of the Suboxone and Subutex and gabapentin.
It's definitely very complex. Um, okay, I think that's all I'm seeing in the Q&A for questions. I know we mentioned the resources for the for just marijuana, right? So I'll send my information in the chat too. So if anyone needs resources as well, I am happy to send off some information for some organizations we work with, especially for those adolescents. But I think
Yeah,
that
somebody
we're
just
all.
commented that, the
Oh,
RTC treatment centers don't get coverage
mm,
for and have somebody come in on kratom, right? So or kratom.
yeah.
And they don't even want to touch that one because it's a legal substance in Arizona. And why, I don't know, but it's legal. So is it an issue? And I'm butt heads with them all the time. Go, so is alcohol, but you treat alcoholism.
Yeah. We actually did have another one come through. Can you say more about how exercise addiction is being conceptualized similarly and differently as a process addiction versus exercise bulimia as an eating disorder? It seems like there would be relevant treatment considerations.
So when it becomes a problem, it's a problem, right? So if I have time to work out 3 hours a day, which I don't, but if you have it and you're not interfering with other aspects of your life, you know, then is it a problem? If I'm obsessing over it, if I'm exercising compulsively, um, and now I can't remember the name for the addiction, it starts with an O. But anyways, it's like our relationship with food, right? I need exercise, I need food, but when does it cross the line to becoming compulsive and addictive?
Mm,
And again, that's up to the individual. There are plenty of people that eat more than me and less than me. I have to eat what is appropriate for me.
mm. And then we just got another. Is ART able to help an individual who has been diagnosed with BPD who is also an alcoholic with no long sobriety?
Diagnosed with what?
BPD,
Oh,
borderline.
yes, I've used it with, you're talking borderline or bipolar?
I'm guessing borderline, but they did not
Okay.
specify.
Because I've used it with both, but with clients who are borderline, right, there's usually some triggering event or some childhood situation that triggers, like OCD. I've worked with a lot of OCD people, and it's back in childhood, and so we address those events. But with borderline, it's more about parts. And it's like, what parts are coming up and what do they need?
Mm,
Because the disturbance, right, becomes a mechanism to survive, not just um, be problematic, if you will. Because I look at addictions and I look at emotional issues and I look at the human being at the base level of we're all trying to survive. And if marijuana helps me get through my day, then it's what I'm going to use until somebody introduces me to something else and gives me a motivation to go down that path as opposed to smoking weed to get rid of my anxiety.
gotcha. Okay. Um, if we have time for one more at least, we have Why are medical diagnoses prioritized over co-occurring? What is the trend?
Who owns the companies? Um, it used to drive me up a wall that somebody with an anxiety disorder, right, would get more days than a heroin addict who I would tell my peer review, not peer review, sorry, my peer to peer. I would tell them, hey, this guy's suicidal. We discharge him today. He's already told me he's probably just going to go shoot up enough to nod out and die. And the doc on the other side is like, well, he should be okay. Send him to IOP. I'm like, he doesn't need outpatient. He needs to be here where he's safe. But if I have somebody with anxiety disorder or or borderline personality disorder, we'll give him 45 days. It's like, I don't, you know, that's a question for the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies that want to treat everything with a pill. Because I'll get political on
And on that note, no, just kidding.
you.
I think
I'm
that's all
not
the
running for
questions
office. Don't worry, Carly.
we have.
Never.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We really appreciate you taking the time to give this wonderful presentation, and I'm sure a lot of people got a lot from it. I'm going to go ahead and send in the chat to the link to the trainings. I know some of them are yours and some are other trainers, but I'll go ahead and send those in the chat. And we'll be sure, again, we'll send out the CEU certificate to the email you registered with by the end of next week, along with the slides for the presentation. But thank you all so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Carly.
you.
Thanks, Paige.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
And tell Katie, thank you.
Yes, we
Thanks,
will.
Erica. Bye.